I'm calling to order our February 24th meeting of the Planning and Zoning Board. As always, we will start with the adoption of our agenda. If anyone has any changes they'd like to make, go ahead. If not, I'll look for a motion.
I'll make a motion to approve tonight's agenda.
Second.
All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Carries unanimous. There's going to be a slight change with the printed agenda. Our approval of the November 12th minutes have already taken place at our January meeting, so we'll have no need to do that. And approval of the January 27th meeting minutes will be done at our future meeting. So we're going to skip through. We have no meeting minutes to do, so we're going to go ahead and skip that portion and move right into our cases. Our first case of this evening is going to be 19 REZ01. Ms. Puckett.
Thank you. Whoa, I apologize. It's touchy tonight. Good evening, board. Sorry about that. This is a request to rezone approximately 20 acres south of Morrisville Parkway and north of Green Hope School Road, southeast of the new interchange at NC 540. The Twyla Road South PDD, also known as Twyla Village PDD, is located on the south side of Morrisville Parkway and is adjacent to the new 540 interchange. The Friars Gate subdivision is adjacent to the east. Morrisville Parkway was recently completed across 540 and is open to traffic. The NC 540 interchange has also recently completed construction. For context, the new interchange at Morrisville Parkway is the only interchange between Highway 55, 2.3 miles to the north, and Green Level West Road, 1.8 miles to the south. The site is zoned R40 and Watershed Protection Overlay District. The applicant is requesting to rezone to PDD minor, and the Watershed Protection Overlay will remain. The PDD proposes 3 subdistricts. C1, which would be limited to no more than 12,500 square feet of commercial uses and 17,000 square feet of office uses. RMF1, which would be limited to a maximum of 104 multifamily units. And R1, which would be limited to up to 85 townhomes. This has been reduced from 95 townhomes since the council public hearing. This is a list of all the commercial uses typically permitted by right or as a special use in the general commercial zoning district. The proposed PDD would limit the uses to those shown here in its C1 subdistrict. After removing a number of uses, we are left with the following list, which is reorganized on this next slide to be more legible. Proposed uses include banks, offices, restaurants without drive-throughs only, retail and personal service uses, veterinary hospitals with indoor kennels only, and several other uses. Since the Town Council public hearing, a veterinary hospital with an outdoor kennel has been removed from this list, and restaurants, again, have been limited to those without drive-throughs. Portions of the site are impacted by stream buffers, but field determination of such features shall be required at time of development plan review. An analysis of the request against the Imagine Cary Community Plan finds that policies in several chapters of the plan apply, including the live, work, shop, and shape chapters. The Future Growth Framework map identifies this site as being within a commercial center. Commercial centers are typically defined as having a shopping center of 5 to 10 acres or more and are intended to serve nearby residential neighborhoods. This request proposes a maximum of 29,500 square feet of non-residential uses, which could include up to 12,500 square feet of commercial uses. By area, approximately 11% of the project is designated for these non-residential uses. The applicant has offered a phasing condition ensuring that certificates of compliance for at least 10,000 square feet of these non-residential uses will be issued prior to building permits being requested for more than 150 units, and an additional 10,000 square feet being completed before permits for more than 180 units are requested. Looking at the commercial center as a whole, it includes the recently approved Twyla North PDD and the Lowe's at Greystone Shopping Center, which will be anchored by a grocery store. These 3 proposed developments, which together comprise almost the entirety of the commercial center at this interchange, would provide between about 65,000 and 142,000 square feet of commercial and office uses, a hotel, and up to 584 residential units. The project proposes a mix of townhouses and multifamily units. This would help contribute to the housing mix in the immediate area by providing less common housing types. Furthermore, the applicant has provided design conditions on the multifamily units to differentiate them from garden-style apartments, such as limiting the number of units per building, making the units rear-loaded, and providing accessible rooftop areas. The development is also in an emerging neighborhood where a number of forthcoming projects are in the development process. The small-scale commercial and office uses proposed in close proximity to the new interchange could provide a unique opportunity for new or expanding firms. On the other hand, the limited amount of non-residential space proposed could somewhat limit the ability for this project to fully meet this work policy. The applicable shop policy specifies that commercial uses should be focused in commercial centers, and as the proposed development is primarily residential, again, it may not fully comply with this policy. A traffic study evaluated 15 intersections within 1 mile of the site boundary per LDO requirements. As a result of the projected traffic generated by this project, a number of recommended traffic improvements were identified. The applicant has committed to several of these. A signal warrant analysis at Morrisville Parkway and Highcroft Drive, and installation of a signal if warranted. A turn lane for the northbound approach of Green Level Church Road and Green Hope School Road. This is a partial improvement, as the recommended signal warrant analysis has not been offered. Improvements at site access on Green Hope School Road, which would include an exclusive left turn lane into the site, and improvements at both the site access on Kempthorne Road and at Morrisville Parkway. 19 people attended the neighborhood meeting in March. Concerns and questions included the type and appearance of the proposed residential units, buffers against the adjacent Friarsgate neighborhood, and traffic. To date, staff have not received any calls or emails regarding the case. However, one concerned citizen did speak with staff when they were posting the site, expressing concerns about traffic and the timing of this request with Twyla North. A public hearing was held at the October 24th Town Council meeting. One nearby property owner spoke against the case, citing loss of open space and potential for increased traffic. 4 citizens spoke in favor of the request. 3 were owners of properties involved in this case, with one other speaker representing 2 additional property owners. They described how nearby development and road projects have impacted their properties over time and how long they have been trying to sell this assemblage. Council members had several comments and questions. They stressed the importance of meaningful community gathering space. Some members commented on several of the uses that may be in opposition to the walkable village the development seeks to create, which you've seen have since been removed. One member noted the small area designated for non-residential uses was a concern, while another member noted the request could still be appropriate in the context of nearby commercial development. One member also noted concerns with the nearby Green Level Church and Green Hope School intersection, and again, staff would like to note that the applicant has offered a partial improvement at that intersection. Council members also asked for more information about the topographic issues of the site. In response to this last item, the applicant has since submitted a diagram indicating the elevation differential between Morrisville Parkway and the edge of the development. The diagram indicates the site will sit approximately 17 feet higher than the adjacent roadway. Since the public hearing, the applicant has indicated to staff that there is a 75-foot wide public utility easement impacting the property frontage, shown here, which requires the streetscape to be moved further back from the site and will slightly reduce the overall developable area of some of the sub-districts. The applicant has reduced the overall residential unit count by 10 to account for this reduction in size. The applicant has also added a note to the PDD to allow the opportunity to work with utilities at the time of development plan to potentially reduce this easement if feasible at that time. The applicant has also added or modified some provisions of the PDD. Again, veterinary hospitals with outdoor kennels and restaurants with drive-thrus have been excluded from the uses permitted in the C1 tract. The maximum number of townhouses has been reduced to 85 units, reducing the overall residential component to 189 dwellings maximum. Community gathering space has been increased from 12,000 square feet to a minimum of 20,000 square feet, which is 5 times the LDO requirement. Community gathering spaces will be in the approximate location shown on the master plan, and each is to be amenitized with benches, trash receptacles, and pet waste stations, as well as at least 2 other amenities from a pick list which includes plazas, planting beds, dog parks, playgrounds, water features, and public art. Likewise, conditions have been added to provide amenities along internal streets, including benches, decorative crosswalks, decorative street lighting, and petway stations. Finally, the applicant has offered the previously mentioned phasing condition for the commercial tract to receive certificates of compliance for at least 10,000 square feet of non-residential area prior to requesting a building permit for the 151st unit, and at least 20,000 square feet of non-residential area prior to the permit for the 181st residential unit. Staff finds that the request is consistent with some policies of the Imagine Cary Community Plan. The request supports multiple policies in the LIVE chapter, especially as it provides housing options both within the development and in a larger context. It does partially support work and shop policies by locating some non-residential uses in the development, which could provide some opportunities for employment, as well as some smaller commercial uses that could be accessed by residents within and near to this development. The proposal provides some horizontal mixing of uses and does provide use-informed transitions quite well. New conditions ensuring increased and amenitized community gathering spaces, along with a 50-foot streetscape along Morrisville Parkway, does help meet the quality and attractive appearance of development policy. There are also some policies of the plan which may not be fully met by this proposal. While the development does provide some opportunities for employment, as well as some small amount of shopping for nearby residential developments, these uses are limited to a small portion of the site. In terms of the shape chapter, the request does not fully meet the policy of distributing commercial centers throughout town to serve residents, since only a small area of the site is designated for potential shopping or personal service uses. The future growth framework is the most difficult to evaluate, as this proposal does not appear to meet the intent of such a center in and of itself. However, in the context of the overall commercial center, which includes some commercial uses and a hotel in the Twyla North development, along with the grocery store anchored shopping center to the west, which has recently obtained building permits, the proposed development could at least partially meet the intent of a commercial center. When weighing all policies against each other, staff found that on the whole, the request is closer to consistency than not. On the balance, and with the changes since Town Council public hearing, staff's preliminary finding is that the proposed development is consistent with the Imagine Cary Community Plan. In reviewing this request, the board may consider a number of factors, including the uses and densities proposed, and whether the development provides good transitions. The board may also wish to consider whether the proposed development meets the intent of a commercial center. This concludes staff's presentation. The applicant's representative is here to speak about the request, after which we'll be available for any questions.
Thanks, Ms. Puckett. I'll now invite the applicant forward to address the board.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Bob Zumwalt. Thank you for your time tonight. I am Director of Planning and Design at McAdams, and I'm a landscape architect. We began the process about a year ago, and during that time we've worked to address issues raised by both the staff and the council, and I think all of them have resulted in a stronger proposal. As always, I kind of wonder why I do a presentation when the Cary staff is so eloquent at it. Erin covered everything, so I'm going to try not to repeat what she said as best I can. Just want to hit some highlights, talk about a few things that we've modified since the original submittal, and then some of the things that we did to address the council's concern. This PDD is a unique community, as you know, located at this important quadrant with Morrisville Parkway and 540. Despite our location at a freeway interchange, the access still does remain quite challenging, as our site is limited to a right-in, right-out due to the proximity to the ramps. Despite this compromised access, we've worked hard to try to create a mixed-use, walkable community that does include a variety of housing types, along with the 29,500 square feet of commercial floor area adjacent to Morrisville Parkway. The design of the community does transition from the most intense to the least intense as you transition from Morrisville Parkway back to the south and the east toward the existing townhome community, as Erin mentioned. During the public hearing, we did hear a desire for a true sense of place, and also there was some concern voiced about phasing. And as Erin mentioned, I do believe we've addressed both of these issues, and I just want to hit a few highlights for you. To ensure an architecturally diverse community, the project contains both townhomes and a unique multifamily offering that's not been seen anywhere else in Cary. To guarantee this vision, we've added a couple of conditions, 3 of them. One, that all multifamily units and 80% of the townhomes will be rear-loaded and fed from the back with alleys, so there will not be as many garages, if any, facing the streets. Secondly, all upper-story multifamily units, as well as at least 35% of the townhomes, will have rooftop terraces that people can go out on, which is something different. Third, multifamily buildings will be limited to 16 units, and the intent of that was to make sure that we just don't get standard garden-style apartments, that they would be smaller buildings. Next, I want to hit on amenities and walkability. To create a community that's got an active street level and an engaging community gathering areas, we did put some conditions in the plan. I'll hit some of those. Minimum of 20,000 square feet of community gathering space. That's about 5 times what would have been required. We did, as Aaron mentioned, add required program elements in the community gathering areas so that they couldn't just be, blank play fields. I'm not going to go through the list. Aaron covered all those, but there would be a certain number of committed elements in each one of those gathering areas. And then an enhanced streetscape, which would include 6-foot wide sidewalks on both sides of the streets, street amenities like benches, decorative crosswalks, decorative lighting. Those are all committed in the plan as well. Phasing, Aaron mentioned we did commit to the phasing of capping the amount of residential permits to 150 until the commercial space of 10,000 is built. So I won't cover that again, but we did add those 2 phasing thresholds of 150 and 180. And then changes since the public hearing, just to summarize those, the reduction in townhomes from 95 to 85, the increased community gathering area, adding the community gathering area elements, the enhanced streetscape elements, adding the phasing, improvements at Green Level and Green Level Church Road and Green Hope School Road if the town desires that option. And then we did delete the uses related to drive-throughs and outdoor kennels. Finally, I just want to touch on the challenges related to the commercial component of the project. The subject property does have a commercial center designation. While our site does contribute to the amount of commercial, it was pretty hard to make a major contribution when the access was kind of sealed as a right-in, right-out when the interchange was built. In addition to this restricted access, as you saw in that exhibit, the commercial pad is going to sit about 125 feet back from the street, at least 15 to 17 feet above the street, due to this cut slope that's out there, the utility easement, and the 50-foot streetscape buffer. These factors make it a challenging site to attract large, effective commercial, given the right-in, right-out nature of our access. In determining whether the proposal complies with the community plan, we feel like you have to look at this whole commercial node and not just this parcel in a vacuum, and Aaron did point that out. To date, there's approximately over 200,000 square feet of commercial space when you include the hotel square footage in this quadrant. And based on these numbers, we believe that this area does meet the definition of a commercial center. Additionally, this precedent was set when council approved the Twyla Road North project based on the commercial center designation being met in all 3 quadrants. In summary, the proposal is consistent with policies found in the plan. The community plan, it provides a mix of housing types, employment, shopping, and services, vertical or horizontal mixed use, and a logical transition of uses. The project offers architecturally diverse and walkable mixed-use community with a large open space component. And in addition, the size of the units are anticipated to be in the 1,400 to 2,400 square feet, which we feel will provide a much-needed, more affordable housing opportunity for residents of Cary. And that's something that I think is a big plus. With that, I'm done. I appreciate your time, and I look forward to your support, and we're here for that questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Stimwell. I'll now open it up for board questions. Jump on in. Anyone over here?
Oh, okay, well, I'll ask one. Just re-educate me why there's not any entrance from Morrisville Parkway. That's not, because, right, you can't, you don't have access to Morrisville Parkway, correct?
Yeah, we do have access.
You do? Oh, okay.
So, if people coming from the east, they can't turn left into the site. So the only way to get to this would be to go past the site, go around the roundabout, and come back.
Okay, so if I'm coming off 540, I'm okay, I can turn.
You can turn right.
I can turn right, but if
That's
I'm
right.
coming up,
55.
If you're coming from
55,
55, you can't turn in. that
you
way.
have to go behind it.
That's right. You'd have to either loop around at the roundabout and come back, or drive through Friars Gate and come in through the backside and back around this way. Does that make sense?
It does. Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Ryan, I have a question.
Go ahead.
So in the, I guess the proposal, there's a description of the architectural development standards. And I was just wondering if the applicant would consider offering any conditions relative to like materials or design. It's on page 11. We've seen other rezoning applications that offer architectural standards, so I'm just curious if that's something that the applicant would consider. Well, just some description of what the buildings would look like. The conditions, the standards talk about the location of the garages, the percentage of units that have access to rooftops. So just in terms of like what materials are you proposing to use and what?
Yeah, this product we build, I'm Brian Ketchum, was
Hi, Brian.
the buyer, hopefully. So this product is something we've built in other cities, and we're excited to bring it to Cary. And it is a very high-quality product that has generally hardy surfaces, masonry.
Okay.
Bob mentioned we're wanting to bring a more affordable product here, but it's not a affordable product. I mean, in that sense, it's a very nice stacked condo product in a 3-story townhome that generally has what you would consider upper level finishes. I mean, I could get into some details if it helped, but it's not a vinyl siding type building. It's not a.
Aaron, are they able to include images with their rezoning application?
We usually recommend that they don't, only because the builder can change, these conditions run with the land.
Oh,
so we
okay.
don't want them to be tied to that. However, I think to the point that you're getting at, and something that the applicant could consider doing, is that we do have things like, in the community appearance manual, for example, we do have conditions for things like masonry and transparency and things of that nature that we have had rezoning conditions in the past that, for example, offer a slightly higher percentage of masonry or something like that.
Okay.
If they know that's something that,
Yeah, and the appearance manual already requires a higher percentage on visible sides, and a lot of that's covered fairly well. In past projects, I have offered some stuff, so if you have specifics, we probably already meet or would be willing to.
If I can jump in real quick, if we can have somebody, I know this is a really general question, from staff, just to kind of clarify the architectural standards, just a very general speaking of what would be, because there are a bunch of requirements that the town has on applicants in general to encourage, architectural standards.
Yeah,
So-
and my question's just based off of what I read, so.
Right, I just want to
I'm
be clear
asking.
that there are some things in place that the applicant would be required to.
Thank you.
Good evening, Doug Loveland with Planning Department. The architectural requirements of the CAM requires a 35% masonry on all visible facades. So any facade that is visible from a street or a parking lot, that's generally all 4 facades. It's going to require principles, 8 other principles that have to be met for composition, which talks about symmetry and balance and rhythm and articulation, which I won't get into all the details of it, but they do apply to all facades. The one exemption actually is transparency. We don't want to require transparency into a dwelling because that can be a little sensitive. It interacts with or interferes with the floor plan. You want privacy in a dwelling, but all the other standards do apply. Commercial, we apply a higher masonry percentage. Multifamily is 35%. Commercial will be 70%. That's just the way the community appearance manual is set up.
Does that help to your point of
Yeah,
a
so
level
just
of
to
comfort of-
clarify, the applicant doesn't have to include that because it's already required.
Those are town requirements, yes.
Okay,
We meet or exceed all those.
okay, thank you, thanks.
Do you have any other questions or?
We didn't talk about parking reductions, but it was mentioned in the application?
Yes, so the applicant has requested a parking reduction. I believe they're proposing 2 spaces. Sorry, let me.
I can't see you, there's a giant podium. I see like this much of your head.
I think that's usually set up a little differently. I feel like I don't usually quite have that struggle. Apparently, I'm just struggling this evening. Yes, so they have proposed 2 units 2 parking spaces per unit. As a comparison, and I have the actual, I believe, calculation in my notes, but we typically require 2.25 spaces for a unit if it's 2 bedrooms or below, and then you get an extra half space for units with an additional bedroom. So when we kind of calculated it out, and I believe the specific number wasn't in the staff report since we don't know how many units might be 3-bedroom compared to 2 or 1, but essentially it would be somewhere between like a 20 to upper 20% of reduction, which is usually, that's pretty much in the range of what we typically see. It's not out of the realm of what we see as a typical request. Yeah, so at the low end, it would be as low as like an 11% reduction, and at the high end, you're looking at 27. That would be assuming that all of those multifamily units were 3-bedroom. The applicant might be able to speak to more of what the proposed breakdown is, but we recall that that is not a condition at this time, so it could be as high as 27% under the current conditions.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll just add, Aaron's right, it's not a condition, but the intent here is I don't believe we have any 3-bedroom units, and given the amount of restriction on front load, which current plan has no front load in it, to be honest with you, there's going to be lots of on-street parking. You can't count that toward the parking requirement, but there will be parallel parking. Basically, everywhere that we're not in a site triangle, we're going to try to have on-street parking to kind of enhance that streetscape. So that's why we feel like this is more than enough parking, because of what we'll have on the street.
Okay, and it's in your best interest to provide enough
That's true.
parking? Yeah, okay.
And the current plan, everything has 2-car garage, everything has a parking space in the driveway in the back as well, so.
Okay.
We feel it'll be covered.
Great, thank you.
And just to clarify a little bit further, they have committed to the town's parking standards for the townhome portion and the commercial portion, so that reduction is only for the multifamily piece or the RMF.
Hi, good evening. I have a couple questions, and it has to, some of mine have already been answered, but regarding the buffers, and I'm just trying to put this into context with some of the adjacent properties. It was in the staff report that in the northwest adjacent to this property is town-owned property. The lot next to that piece of land next to it, where they're proposing just a 10-foot buffer. Can the staff give any insight as to what may be happening with that? I mean, if it's going to lay dormant, then I'm not going to worry about a 10-foot buffer. Looking at buffer reduction, that's really what I'm looking at, is what was required and what's being reduced here, and trying to have an idea of the context.
Yeah.
So we'll start with that piece there.
Right, so we're talking about the piece that's currently town-owned, this piece of property at the very northwestern corner, I believe. So they are requesting a reduction there. I believe it's typically a 20 that would be required, and I believe that's the only area they're requesting that reduction. That is town-owned property, and there are no planned uses for that currently. I believe it was kind of a remainder from the right-of-way that was acquired when the interchange and the Morrisville Parkway extension project went through. So knowing that that property is unlikely to be developed, at least for the foreseeable future, staff were fairly comfortable with a reduction requested for such a small portion of the buffer.
Okay. And on the other areas, let's say to the east and to the south, the 20-foot type B buffer is what was being required. So there's no other reduction in buffers, and with the exception where they're abutting the increase of the 50-foot type A, where it's adjoining Green Hope School Road, and also to the north is where they've increased buffer. I'm just trying to get the net buffer down.
Yes,
Okay.
so for the vast majority of the perimeter, they're offering, what would be required under the LDO. Since this is a PDD, they can, request to set their own standards. And as you noted, the streetscape on Morrisville, typically we would require 50 feet for residential, 30 feet for commercial. So if we kind of treat that commercial pod as its own little development, they would actually be exceeding what we would typically require for commercial.
Okay, thank you. I don't have any other questions right now. I actually do have one question. It was what's the difference between a PDD major and minor? So this is referred to as a minor, and so what constitutes a major and a minor?
It's based on the acreage, so PDD minor is 20, or is it 25? 10 to 25? Okay, 10 to 25 acres is minor, 25 and up is major. I can never remember if it's a 20 or 25 acre cutoff, sorry.
Okay, thank you. There's one member up here that said it all depends what key it's in. So that's what we're laughing about. Thank you.
I have no concerns with this except one. The 11% commercial seems too low to meet that work and shop policy. And my question to Mr. Zumwalt is, was more O&I considered, or was a hotel motel considered to bump up the commercial use of this property?
I really think the access makes this incredibly difficult. The location, 125 feet back from the road, almost 20 feet above the road, buffered behind 50 feet of landscaping, and then the access challenging to overcommit to a bunch of commercial that could just sit vacant. I think you're better off to have a smaller, more vibrant, sort of successful piece, which this would probably be 2-story, rather than try to overcommit and then it sits vacant. Like I was trying to make the point, 238,000 square feet of commercial on the 3 corners around. I think had this been a full movement intersection, it would have had a better chance of having more commercial, but I think with the way the access is, let's face it, we're all kind of lazy. And if it's not easy to get into a commercial center, you're just going to drive past it and drive to the one where you can just drive right in.
But my question was, I know of big blocks of hotels in Cary that have only right turn in, right turn out access, and there are 4 or 5 hotels sitting there. And office and institutional, you can put it up on a hill and drive up the hill to get to it, and it doesn't seem to bother anybody. I understand if it's shopping, that you have that problem, but if it's office and institutional or hotel, I don't see that it's a limitation.
Yeah, I mean, this is what we feel the market will support here. And
Well, isn't that the real answer is there's a hot market for the residential, and that's what you're responding to rather than the policy, the work and shop policy of the town.
I feel like if you look at all 3 quadrants, I think it's an appropriate amount of commercial at this intersection, yeah.
I have a question about the traffic situation. It looks like there was a lot of recommendations made, and some of them it seems that the staff is concerned about a couple of them. Would you elaborate on where you think this meets a standard that is acceptable, particularly in, I think it was having to do with the Green Hope School east-westbound movements and delays in existing conditions?
Certainly. Good evening, Travis Flewitt with Kinley Horn and Associates here on behalf of the applicant. Aaron, can we go back to the Orwell slide that had all the locations? That's the one. Yeah, so this showed the locations where improvements were recommended. The main ones, the ones circled in blue are the ones we committed to, and that's where we're going to have the most significant impacts. We're trying to put our money where we're going to have the most significant impacts to traffic. Committing to the traffic signal at Highcroft and Morrisville Parkway is the big one. That's a big ticket item. That was a requirement of the Twyla North development as well. And the way if you recall, there were a number of rezonings coming in along Morrisville Parkway. There was the Cary Point at the intersection of 55 and Morrisville Parkway, the Sam's Express that has since gone away, and then Twyla North and Twyla South. And there were a lot of overlapping improvements, and rather than trying to cut and paste or contribute money to them, what staff recommended to do is we divide and conquer all those improvements. So Cary Point did a couple of them. Twyla North committed to the big ticket item, which was the dual eastbound left turn lanes on Morrisville Parkway at 55. And then Twyla South is doing the signal at Highcroft and Morrisville Parkway. So that's the big one. We're doing turn lanes at our site driveways. I think the two where staff had concerns, there was a signal requested at the intersection of Morrisville Parkway and Sedgefield Park. I don't know if you can see my house right there. That one, we were only adding through traffic on Morrisville Parkway. We're not adding any turning movements, so we're not really driving the need for that signal. And another thing I'll add about that is when the traffic counts were done, the extension of Morrisville Parkway over 540 was not in place. The interchange was not in place. So pretty much everybody was turning left out of there to go to 55. I would wager that if you went and did traffic counts now, there are a lot more people turning right out of Sedgefield Park to go toward the interchange and west on Morrisville Parkway. So I don't think that signal is going to be warranted anytime soon. That, I could be wrong about that, but I don't think that's likely. And then the other location was at Green Level Church, Green Hope School Road. This development is expected to have a less than 1% impact at that intersections. The TER projected we would have 13 AM trips and 9 PM trips, so a very minor impact. And they are already committing to do the northbound right turn lane at that intersection, so really doing more than their fair share to absorb the cost of the turn lane, and the signal is kind of going above and beyond the impact that they're having at that location. So those were the main ones I think staff had concerns with, but the short answer is we're putting our money to get the most bang for our buck where we're making an impact.
I appreciate that explanation. I'm just curious about how much the town controls this going forward and how much of this is going to be DOT or out of your control.
So I was going to mention, we do have Priyatham Kanda here from traffic tonight, who might be able to speak more to the staff side of this and answer some of those more technical questions.
Good evening, Priyatham Kanda with Transportation Facilities. Morrisville Parkway is maintained by NCDOT, and they do concur with the improvements that Travis has just mentioned. Generally, if they were reviewing the traffic studies, they would require fewer improvements than what we are requiring, so they should cover everything.
Okay. All right. Good to know.
Can I ask one question while you're there?
Yeah.
Is Green Level Church Road, is that a DOT road or is that a Town of Cary road?
That is the NCDOT road.
That's it, okay. So that signal at Morrisville Parkway and Green Level Church would actually be a DOT warrant if we were to signalize that?
It's Green Hope School Road.
Oh, I'm sorry, wrong one, wrong location, thank you. Yeah, appreciate that. Yeah, so the Green Hope High School, the Green Hope School Road and Green Level Church Road, that would be up to DOT? The town would have to go through DOT?
That is correct, and at that intersection, we do have some safety concerns, so we're working with NCDOT to understand what's the best signal configuration at that location.
Okay, all right, thank you. Appreciate it.
Any other questions?
I have a follow-up question about the concentration of commercial on the space. So if this project were to move forward, did the staff do an analysis on what the breakdown would be of commercial within that full commercial center?
We did, so, and I believe it's based on actual square footage and not acreage. Let me pull that up very quickly. Actually, I believe I have a slide that illustrates this. So when we kind of put these three portions of that commercial center together, we're kind of looking at a range because we do have kind of, Twyland North has a minimum of 10,000 square feet that could go up to 40. Similar with this development, we could be looking at that almost 30,000 square feet, or we could be looking at as little as 10 if they don't ever quite get to that full residential build out. There is a range in your staff report of what that would look like in total. And let's see, I believe I have it here. So on the low side, if everything kind of just builds at its minimums, it could be about 65,000 square feet of commercial and office space in this area, or a little less. Could also include a hotel in addition to that 65,000. It could be as high as about 142,000 square feet if everything builds out at the full commercial allotment that these three sites are entitled to.
Do you have the percentage?
I don't, but we can certainly get that information and put it in the report as it goes
Okay.
forward.
Yeah, I think that would be important, because if it's still a low percentage overall, then I don't think that it,
That's certainly fair. Yes. We can get that.
okay, thank you. And it would also be interesting to see without Lowe's, because, I mean, Lowe's is one store. So I feel like that is, you know, if you're looking at it as a concentration, because it's such a large, it has such a large footprint, it may bump up the numbers. I'd be curious across on the east side what the percentages would be.
We can certainly get that.
Okay, thank you.
Ryan, can I ask a follow-up question? I think one of the things about the town of Cary and commercially zoned property is you sometimes drive around and you see vacant property. So I would be very curious if staff could, or maybe this is something you're already thinking about, but, you know, when I look at this proposed development, and I look at how it's laid out, it makes a lot of sense to me. And it seems as though, how can we look at commercial not only in relation to the parcels that are in and around it, but more throughout the entire town? And I know the plan talks about that, but it just seems like we're honing in so closely on one section. And I would even be curious to find out how much vacant commercial property there already is, and why would we rezone residential property to commercial when this multifamily makes so much sense? So I just think that I need more information about how much commercially zoned property there actually is. You know, because we get the existing zoning and it's like zoomed in on the site, and it would be better to just take a little bit of a wider view. Does that make sense?
It does.
Yeah.
I think that's something we could look into and pull some numbers.
Yeah, and I'm just saying that generally speaking, not necessarily in relation to this one,
I
but,
gotcha.
because, well, we're not at that point, right? We're still at questions?
Right,
Yeah, okay,
and requests.
yeah.
That's fine. Does anyone have any other questions, or if not, I'll look for a motion.
I'll make a motion. I'll move that the board find case number 19 REZ01 is consistent with the comprehensive plan and all other applicable plans for the reasons set forth in the staff report presentation and discussion by the Planning and Zoning Board.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Discussion?
Sure. And I appreciate everybody on the board's conversation, particularly wrestling with commercial. But, you know, I think it was mentioned earlier on, when we had this discussion when we looked at Twyla Road North. And we talked about the hotel, and we talked about the lack of commercial. And I remember the conversation then was about looking at that intersection as totality, because it's relatively new, it's just been completed, we get the roundabouts, it doesn't even show up on Google Earth, you know, and so you're trying to figure out what's really going on in there. And I wrestle with that too. I first started out not in favor of this project. I thought they were trying to put 10 pounds into a 5-pound bag. But thinking about it, looking at it a little bit differently, on the commercial side, you know, we've seen some other projects come that were zoned commercial. They went something else because the market demand wasn't there. And I think about the trends here in retail, and what we've seen is that, you know, an exit north of us is a major shopping center. And then we know the exit south is going to be a major destination center. It has been developed, although we have had one applicant come in and we approved about 1 million square feet of development there. We haven't seen the other side of that. Go one exit beyond that, and you're at 64 and 540 more major retail. So I think in there you're going to have that kind of that niche. And I think we recognized when Twyla North came in, we said, okay, because the Lowe's was there and that was kind of the major commercial, and I think the Lowe's was going to be 50,000 square feet. There's some other ancillary commercial development there. That it kind of made that mix, in my mind anyways, it kind of began to work, because I think that's where the market was and the market is. I don't think there's ever going to be a kind of a live, work, play sort of destination, not like a Fenton or, you know, what we're going to see potentially at the mall, et cetera. So I think it kind of fits right. I mean, it's not perfect. And it's some interesting, you know, this whole little area has been carved up, and I've been on the board, some other folks have too. to seeing all the development or all the piecemeal approach to Twyla to the north, the residential came in, it came in a lot at a time, as those things go. So I support it for that, understanding the buffers a little bit. It'll be kind of a unique spot. I agree with, I don't know if it's going to be that much of a traffic generator because the folks who live there are going to be able to come out the back way onto Green Hope School Road, et cetera. So they have some ways to get in and out. The commercial is going to be a challenge, but anyways, that's my 2 cents.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I support this rezoning. First of all, I think the layout is really smart with the way that the roads are organized, and the point that you were just making about people having options for ways to get in and out. I agree with the gentleman from McAdams that it's very difficult. The topography of the site is really driving the ability to develop it. And I mean, I think that the layout is well done for multifamily, and it is providing the different types of housing that we need in the town of Cary. So I don't think forcing commercial is going to be helpful, especially when we have, someone who's interested in buying the property and developing it and doing it in a way that provides, let's talk about the good things that the application provides, all of the community gathering space, the rooftop, what are they called, terraces, thinking the rooftop, the mix of different types of units, that's going to attract different types of people. I think all of those things are good. So that's why I'm supporting the rezoning.
Any other discussion?
Just one other comment. To me, obviously, again, this is my opinion, this doesn't meet the definition of a commercial center. However, if you look at the live and the shape side, I don't know how you could, with the access, that you could have a major commercial center here. And I think the plus on this is by having it more residential, it's going to actually help the traffic. And I worry about people, if this was more commercial, cutting through these neighborhoods and all this. So I think, just to echo, it probably is the best use of the property.
And I am sympathetic to the challenges that were stated. I do like the rooftop terraces. I do like the mix of housing. If I'm looking at it from a consistency standpoint, I would want to see how the numbers break out, because it looks like if the Twyla North property only meets 10,000 square feet, then on the whole, it's nowhere near being a commercial center. And if I'm thinking of strictly, is it aligned to the plan, then I would have to say, no, it's not.
I thought I was going to be the lone dissenter, maybe not. I think more effort could have been put into expanding the commercial. And when I say commercial, I include office and institutional in that. I think the office and institutional could have been substantially greater, even with the constraints that you have on the site. And I think it just doesn't quite meet the standard for the working shop policy. And so I would plan to oppose it.
And I will say, I tried to Google map to see what was the nearest food location from that, and it's 2 miles. So if I'm also thinking about, well, what is the types of businesses that would be coming in that whole of the space, I saw that there's not as many food options within the 1.5 miles that's in the Cary plan. So that's also further is making me feel like it's not consistent.
That's not including the Lowe's, right?
No.
You can get hot dogs at Lowe's.
Do you have anything, Mary Jo? Or?
I really don't. I think I hear the concerns that were brought up, and I think they're legitimate, but at the same time, looks like a very challenging piece of property to try to do a whole lot more creative work with. So and obviously the proximity is attractive to people that want to be accessible to the park and other places, north and west and wherever. So I can see why they have chosen to go this direction. So I think in my mind, it can meet, even if it doesn't completely meet the definition of a commercial center, it still serves a need that could be appropriate here.
So I echo a lot of what Dan says, so I won't reiterate that. But to me, it's really about the commercial center aspect of this case. I think that's really what the holdup is here. For me, I think that the request does meet that. And the reason is you take a step back and you kind of pan out a little bit and you look at the 540 and at either interchange, either north or south, you're looking at a destination center, potentially a large amount of commercial. Oh, there is a large amount of commercial off of 55 today. So really what this commercial center is going to do is it's going to assist those local residents. It's going to be more of a locally supporting commercial center. It's not going to be that regional draw that you would see from those destination centers. And because of that, I believe it does meet its purpose. I believe that there is enough commercial to, I guess, call it a commercial center. So that, for me, that was really the only major holdup. I think overall it is a good proposal, and I think it's a good fit. And I definitely commend the applicant on what they've done. I know that there was some talk around the mitigations, and for me, who drives Green Hope School and Green Level every day, I can tell you that that is a pretty bad intersection. But the applicant has gone above and beyond by being willing to put a mitigation effort there, even though there really isn't going to be much traffic from this site there. And I really commend them for kind of going above and beyond in that mitigation measure and doing that. So with that said, we'll call it to a vote. All those in favor of finding this consistent, please say aye.
Aye. Aye.
All those opposed, please say no.
No.
That measure looks like it passed 5-2. Thank you, Ms. Bucket. We'll now be moving to our next case of the evening, which is going to be 19 REZ 10. Mr. Wilson.
Otherwise, it's a good book. It is.
Just to meet the definition.
Good evening.
Good evening.
This proposal is a request to rezone approximately 14 acres located at 1708 Petty Farm Road to allow a multifamily residential development. The site's located in the Alston area. It's bordered by the Brickyard to the north, the CSX Railroad to the east, and by a single-family house and undeveloped property to the west and south. The Alston Town Center and Panther Creek High School are located nearby on the west side of NC 55. The site's currently used as a lumberyard and has an older dwelling that's now used as an office. Our GIS records indicate that there are stream buffers on the property. The exact location of these features would be determined as part of development plan review. There are not any existing parks or greenways near the site. The site has frontage on Petty Farm Road, which is a dead-end, two-lane local street. The town's adopted roadway widths map does show Mahal Avenue to the north of the site, which is shown here in dashed blue, which is being constructed by the Brickyard as a collector avenue. And the future envisioned alignment of McCrimmon Parkway, shown here in dashed pink, is to the south, and that would be a 4-lane thoroughfare. Again, NC 55 is located just west of the site. Go Cary does not currently provide service in this area. Go Triangle has a route that runs along NC 55, although the nearest stop is just over 1 mile south of the site at NC 55 and Morrisville Carpenter Road. So what is specifically being requested? The applicant wants to build an apartment community on the site. There are 3 zoning scenarios by which development could occur on this site. The first scenario is to develop in accordance with the base zoning district. In this case, the base zoning is Office, Research, and Development, or ORD. The applicant doesn't want to develop office or research-related uses on the site, though, so the base zoning doesn't work for an apartment community. The second scenario is to develop in accordance with the Alston Activity Center concept plan, an overlay district that's very prescriptive, structured, and it's complicated. The plan calls for a mix of uses, and this option does not work very well in this situation either. This brings us to the final option. When the Imagine Cary Community Plan was adopted in 2017, it identified the Alston area as a destination center, thereby providing the ability for a developer to ask for something different with more density. Since the existing base zoning and the Alston Activity Center concept plan overlay zoning do not work for an apartment community by itself, tapping the destination center designation is the only scenario that may be utilized to build an apartment community on the site. Per the LDO, the only zoning district available for a destination center is Mixed Use District, or MXD. Thus, the applicants requested MXD zoning for the site. So if approved, the MXD zoning would replace the existing ORD base zoning and the Alston Activity Center concept plan overlay zoning for the site, effectively creating an area that would no longer be regulated by the Alston plan. At the same time, it's reasonable to consider the requirements of the Alston plan as part of evaluating the proposed MXD zoning for the site. So let's take a quick look at the Alston plan for some context. It breaks the area into 5 neighborhoods. The site is located in the Petty Farm neighborhood, which you can see here with the blue star. In this neighborhood, non-residential and/or mixed use are envisioned to frame the neighborhood's main street and be located adjacent to NC 55 and the future McCrimmon Parkway to the south. Residential uses are intended to be conveniently located for work and play, and it's noted that topography and stream buffers may limit building footprints in this area. The Alston plan regulates land use, density, and design standards through both design zones and traffic analysis zones. The Petty Farm neighborhood includes 2 design zones, Neighborhood Center and Neighborhood General. The site includes land in both of these zones. Neighborhood Center, shown here in pink, is intended to include office and neighborhood retail, as well as apartments and townhouses. Neighborhood General, shown here in orange, is intended to be primarily residential with townhomes and detached dwellings. The site's also located in Traffic Analysis Zone 15, or TAZ 15 for short. This zone, which is basically the southern half of the Petty Farm neighborhood, envisions predominantly office uses with up to 400,000 square feet of office, 60,000 square feet of commercial, and 355 residential dwelling units throughout the zone. So between the design and traffic analysis zones, we could summarize that the Alston plan calls for a mix of uses in the southern half of the Petty Farm neighborhood, with office as the predominant use and retail and residential playing a secondary role. The proposed MXD zoning is accompanied by a required preliminary development plan, or PDP. In addition to limiting the number of apartments on this 13.9-acre site to 320 units, the PDP also includes minimums and maximums for the number of bedrooms in each unit. The plan provides 10,000 square feet of community gathering space, which is 4 times the minimum amount required. The plan also identifies areas for surface parking, along with a few locations where garage parking will be provided. MXD zoning provides the opportunity for its associated preliminary development plan to propose and incorporate alternative standards to achieve the right formula of land uses, scale, intensity, and site design for success. This proposal requests 3 alternative standards. The first is a parking reduction of between 37% and 38%, and the variation depends on how many, if and if so, 3-bedroom units are built. The second is a proposal to remove the requirement to provide at least 24 square feet of individual enclosed storage space with an external entry for each unit. And finally, the third alternative standard is that the applicant is proposing to reduce the eastern buffer from a 30-foot type B to a 20-foot type B. The buffer would still include all of the required plant material. Property owners within 800 feet of the site were notified regarding the public hearing. This exceeds the state requirements of notifying adjacent properties and the LDO requirement of notifying those within 100 feet. A total of 6 citizens attended the neighborhood meeting on June the 5th. Questions focused on the future of Petty Farm Road, whether traffic would drive through the site, if the Petty Farm neighborhood would still be mixed use, and would large buffers be needed if this site is apartments. The council public hearing was held on October 10th of 2019. No citizens spoke at the hearing. Council comments addressed whether the northern Type B buffer provided an appropriate transition to the adjacent Brickyard development, the amount of the parking reduction, the architectural appearance of the units, and the lack of any proposed transportation improvements. There have been no calls or emails since the public hearing. There have been changes that have been made since the public hearing. The applicant has proposed to change the 20-foot northern buffer from a type B to a type A. They've reduced the number of units from 350 to 320. They've added detailed architectural conditions to the proposal, and they've increased the amount of gathering space from 2,500 square feet to 10,000 square feet. Based on staff's review of the proposed rezoning and PDP, we believe there are some key issues that merit some additional discussion and perspective. As proposed, the LDO would normally require 720 to 730 parking spaces for this 320-unit development. This parking would be for both residents and guests. The applicant's proposing a ratio that would provide 448 spaces. This would be a reduction of 37 to 38%. Normally, the LDO limits reductions to a maximum of 30%. Although since this is MXD, the applicant has the ability to propose their own alternative standard, and that's what they've done. Staff is aware that the town's parking standards need updating, and we've observed that it's common for apartment communities to request a reduction in parking. We've previously seen other apartment communities request reductions in the upper 20% range and even the lower 30% range. This request is slightly higher than what we've seen previously. The applicant's justification as to why this alternative standard is acceptable for this proposal is attached to your staff report for reference. A traffic analysis was conducted for the site and improvements were recommended as a result of the study. At this time, the applicant has not offered to make any of the recommended improvements, although the applicant has been working with staff on a potential condition that would help support a signal installation and pedestrian crossings that the town has been working with NCDOT on at the Highcroft and McCrimmon intersection. This afternoon, we reached conceptual agreement on an approach that will work, and it's our understanding that the applicant will be adding this condition to the PDP later this week. As I mentioned earlier, Petty Farm Road is currently a dead-end cul-de-sac extending off Mahal Avenue. In its current alignment, Petty Farm Road and its existing public right-of-way are a significant design constraint for the rest of the Petty Farm neighborhood. Specifically, the location of the road limits the depth of the property between this site and NC 55, limits it to a dimension that will significantly impact the size of building footprints and parking for the office uses that the Alston plan envisioned in this area. In an ideal world, this whole area would develop at once, so there's the ability to abandon the Petty Farm Road right-of-way and propose a single, unified mixed-use development that is able to fully maximize the site. However, this is not an ideal world, and this is just one property in the Petty Farm neighborhood that is before us tonight. With this constraint in mind, we do believe there is the potential to tweak the alignment of Petty Farm Road along the site's frontage to improve the development potential of the area south of the site, and if the rezoning is approved as proposed, we would anticipate working with the applicant on achieving this improved outcome during the development plan review process. Although the Alston plan's applicable design and traffic analysis zones call for mixed use and predominantly office uses in the Petty Farm neighborhood, the new MXD base zoning proposed for the site would only allow multifamily residential uses. And although the site only makes up about 25% of TAS 15, the 320 dwelling units requested for this site would effectively utilize almost all of the residential units that were envisioned for all of TAS 15. In comparison to the Alston plan, though, which was adopted in 2006, the Imagine Cary Community Plan's Future Growth Framework Map, which was adopted in 2017, identifies this area as Destination Center. Destination centers are described in the plan as, and I quote, Cary's premier mixed-use centers that include an integrated mix of commercial, office, and residential uses arranged in a walkable pattern with an active pedestrian realm where buildings front streets. Destination centers are intended to contain the greatest development intensities in Cary and be regional destinations, end quote. Accordingly, the plan describes the character of such areas as urban, with multi-story buildings that frame the streets. Structured parking is encouraged, along with well-defined street and pedestrian networks and multiple outdoor gathering spaces. On balance, we believe that if the area around this site develops in a non-residential manner in the future, then this proposed use on this specific site is situated in such a manner that it could contribute to a future mixed-use outcome in an incremental manner, and is thus an acceptable proposition for this site from a land use perspective. In staff's analysis of the Imagine Cary Community Plan, we've also observed that the request does pursue several of the policies of the Live, Work, and Shape chapters. In particular, apartments would provide another housing option and greater variety by adding a third type of residential dwelling, in addition to the townhouses and detached single-family homes in the adjacent Brickyard development. This proposal would lumberyard for residential purposes. The additional dwellings would support the workforce in close proximity to RTP, and they would provide units that could support other non-residential development in the future. Finally, while the case could be made that the proposal is not consistent with the Alston Activity Center concept plan, the actual question is whether or not the proposal is consistent with the destination center use type in the Imagine Cary Community Plan. We believe that on balance, the case can be made that the proposed use contributes incrementally towards the vision of a destination center designation, and thus we find it to be consistent with the community plan. This concludes staff's presentation. At this time, I'd like to turn things over to Jamie Swedler for the applicant's presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Wilson. And now I'll invite the applicant up to address the board.
Good evening, Mr. Chair and members of the board. I'm Jamie Schwadler with Parker Poe at 301 Fayetteville Street, here on behalf of Crescent Communities, the applicant in this matter. As Rob stated, this request is consistent with the Cary Community Plan because the town's original Alston plan has been updated to the higher density that you see with the destination center and recognizes multifamily as an appropriate use here. This change in use is appropriate because since the Alston plan was approved in 2006, each of the other neighborhoods within the Alston plan have enjoyed significant development, but the mix envisioned for the Petty Farm neighborhood simply has not come to fruition. TAS 15, in which this site is located, has remained virtually untouched, with this site being looked and passed over for both office and commercial use. And even though those two uses have been available by right since 2006, the site has remained undeveloped and in its active use as a lumber yard. In the meantime, office designations to the north and Perimeter Park on the untold portions of 540 have enjoyed tremendous success, and the office is simply located further to the north. And also since that time, the Parkside Town Center and the Alston Town Center have fully developed. And so in 2016, when the destination center was put onto this property, it made sense. There was retail and there was commercial in close proximity, and office was flourishing. And so that's why the destination center recognizes multifamily as an incidental use here. Site. It's interesting that we're after the Twyla Road because I think Mr. McFarland's point about commercial in other nearby areas is right on target here. You have to look at the destination center in totality, not only with respect to this one parcel, and your statements really do ring to develop this area because as an active lumberyard, it's very hard to attract commercial or office to this area, and the market demand has borne that out. Nevertheless, our request is consistent with the Alston Plan guidance, but updated per the Cary Community Plan. The Future Growth Framework Map Destination Center recognizes heights of 3 to 7 stories. We're at 4 to 5 stories, depending on the topography throughout the site. It's supported by the LIVE chapter and the policies that Rob mentioned. And there's not another multifamily product within the Petty Farm area. Our multifamily would complement the mix of houses. The Brickyard to the north has townhomes and single family, but no multifamily. And it's also supported by policies which emphasize the preservation of open space. We've increased our buffer along the Brickyard to a type A buffer. We've committed to 10,000 square feet of community gathering areas with committed elements that echo a foodie theme. So we've had commitments that include things like fruit trees or planted herb gardens, garden walls, outdoor kitchens, and things like that. That are significant commitments on the cover sheet of our PDP. Our use is also clustered around 2 existing stream buffers, which has our dense format kind of aligned along those areas and leaves a quarter of the site committed to open space or stream buffers. And we've also included significant architectural commitments that speak to building materials and other commitments along especially along the main frontage. Our parking modification request is what you might expect in a destination center. In order to achieve the densities that we need here and accommodate the significant open space, we need that parking reduction to work, and we've compared in your packet to other areas and requests along the Alston Center area, as well as other communities that Crescent has developed throughout North Carolina. With respect to the traffic commitments, we appreciate the staff's conclusion in the staff report that our less than 1% traffic generated by this development did not justify those traffic commitments, and we were able to reach an estimate for commitment that I can go into detail that estimated about $50,000 worth of an improvement for a payment in lieu. And we're happy to speak further with staff about the details of that. So in general, we submit that this request, when looked at the Alston plan, updated over time with the destination center, and the significant amount of commitments that we've included in the PDP, makes this space ripe for development in an area that has not supported office or commercial use, even though that designation has existed, and that the multifamily use is really the right use at the right time on the right site for this project. I'm happy to answer any questions and would appreciate a finding that we are consistent with the Cary Community Plan.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
I'll now open it up for board questions. Maybe we'll go on this side this time. Anything over here?
Yeah, I have a question about the parking. So based on that report, it looks like there's essentially one parking space per bedroom, correct?
I'll let Earl Llewellyn speak to that. We changed the actual commitment to 1.4 spaces per unit, but it works out to about one space per bedroom because that's what we've seen in our market demand and other studies.
Earl Llewellyn, traffic engineer with Kimley Horn and Associates. That's correct. The Institute of Transportation Engineers Parking Generation Manual, sort of the standard, if you will, has gathered information about these type facilities across the nation since the 1980s and up through the 2010s. And basically what they're finding is that we're over-parking these sites. The parking supply is at 2 and above, but the demand is at about 1.4. And so that's what we're proposing here. And we think that that's borne out with other similar facilities that Crescent is building.
Yeah, I'm just curious when you do that comparison, because it looks like this site, there's no carryover, so it's self-contained. So if someone were to come in and there'd be no parking spot, for example, they'd have to park pretty significantly far away to make it into that location, right?
It's a good question, but there will be, again, on-street parking. Mm-hmm. We can't count that toward our required parking, but I think there's about 18 or more spaces on the internal streets.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And when you do the comparison, I'm just curious, when you do that sort of baselining or benchmarking, is it comparable to this type of town with that sort of location? Because there's no bus route, so that, obviously if there's a bus route, then that would, and if there's more public transportation, then, it's easier to not have a car.
That's a great point. Yes, the manual sort of separates it into general, suburban, urban. There's no transit if it's close to a rail line or if it's in the urban core. We use the standard urban, suburban category for this comparison.
Urban, suburban.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Thank you for the clarification.
Sure.
Go down here. Anyone on the side?
Oh, I have questions.
Go for it.
But do you want to start?
No, go ahead.
Okay. Actually, continuing on with just the parking a little bit, I'm curious because I know this came up, and I appreciate the applicant saying in this node it's the only multifamily, but then I break out and I start looking at how many multifamily developments are within a mile of here, and I don't have enough fingers in my hand, I don't think. I know this came up with the Astor Apartments when it's built behind Whole Foods and the issue of parking reduction. And I'm just curious as to what that reduction was and what we're seeing in terms of, we know that we're at two parking spaces per apartment, we're over, but does the staff have a sense of I appreciate from the Institute of Transportation, looking at 1.4, does that seem to be right? I mean, where does this request of it was 30% or a little over 30% reduction, where does that fit in what we're seeing in other projects, particularly ones that have been built out?
We have had several projects in this NC 55 Greater Alston area that have asked for parking reductions. At this time, I don't believe that any of them have been completed and fully occupied other than Alston Village. The others that are more multifamily, that are completely multifamily, are still finishing their build out. So we don't have on the ground usage. But the numbers that we've seen have varied from the upper 20s to the low 30s in terms of percent. I think we've seen ratios in the 1.6 range for a lot of those in terms of the number of spaces per unit. This is, while it's a little more, it's in the ballpark of the nature of those requests that we've seen for those other projects within the last 5 years.
I know this is off the top of your head, you may not know, but like Parkside Place, which is north of there, but still in there, do you know what that was? Does anybody recall?
I do not know what the exact ratio is.
Sorry, that was a trick question. That wasn't fair. So moving past that, King Closer Drive. So I look at this node and I'm looking at there was a previous project that had been approved that's really all residential. Most of it's single family detached.
Right.
And I see that King Closer Drive, is that a drive that's required to come through the applicant's property? I thought I saw that on one of the earlier.
Yes, let's see,
okay.
Let's go to it.
So there'd be connectivity from the apartment. So King Closer Drive would be coming through. Google Maps doesn't show it right now as being completed, but I saw somewhere else, I think, in the application that it.
So if you can see, this is Mahal, right here, this intersection. And Mahal comes through as a collector avenue and heads to the east. This is the stub out for King Closer here. And they're working on putting in infrastructure for this phase of the Brickyard right now. And so King Closer is intended to run south and come through this site and head on down towards future McCrimmon Parkway.
Oh, so the plan would eventually, it'll come to when McCrimmon gets some future day come through, it come to McCrimmon.
Correct.
Okay.
When the land to the south develops, then McCrimmon will begin to, just as Mahal began its journey on the east side of 55 with the Brickyard, when development comes on the east side of 55 down in the McCrimmon intersection, they'll build that part of McCrimmon and it'll start to move eastward as well.
Okay. Another question is for staff is the elimination of the external storage in the multifamily units. Is that something that has been allowed or is with other projects that have come before? I just don't remember.
We have had some other projects that have made that same request. And if you'd like some examples, there might be someone else on staff who, but I know that that's not an uncommon request for multifamily units.
Okay, the exterior closet, yeah, basically the outdoor storage closet. Okay, all right, thank you. That's all the questions I have right now. Thanks.
Just one question on the chart that you're showing right now, where it says surface parking. Remind me what's on the other side there going north. Those are single family, what I can't remember what this is.
I believe that they are small single family detached lots. They're single family detached lots and townhomes with the two products in the Brickyard. But that is the Brickyard development that's to the north.
But those are, I couldn't remember though if that was like patio homes or multi-storied or.
Yeah. I believe that they are patio homes on detached lots.
And how big is the buffer between the surface parking and those patio homes? How big is this buffer?
They're proposing a 20-foot type A buffer. No buffer is required in a destination center, but they proposed 20-foot type B. It was mentioned as whether or not that was an appropriate transition, so they've upgraded it from a type B to a type A, which is our highest level of screening.
I mean, I would just think you'd want, if I was in one of those patio homes, and they're not here to talk because they're not here yet, but you'd want some transition there. To me, you wouldn't want to just have a parking lot backed up to a home. That okay, so there'll be a type A buffer there now.
Yes, that's what they've proposed.
Okay, that's it. Thanks.
Sorry, Katie Malimian,
Crescent Communities. I was going to add to that. There is a buffer. The Meritage is selling these parcels, single-family parcels. This is the backside of the homes or backyards that go into the buffer, and the parking lot sits below grade. So there is a retaining wall that goes along the Meritage site, so that there are no headlights or anything looking into the back of the homes.
But theoretically, the apartments themselves, they look like they're pretty far back. They're going to be multi-story. They're going to kind of be over. You know, they'll see into looking down on those homes, but it seems like they'd be fairly far back.
It is. It's fairly far back, and on that side, they're 4-story.
Yep. Yep. Okay.
We don't want to look into single-family homes as much as they don't want.
No, and like you said, that was my concern is, you know, headlights shining into the back of someone's house. You know, that would be a future problem. Okay.
I have a question for staff about the walkability of this proposed rezoning relative to other commercial that's nearby. And there was at one point retail that was shown as in the traffic study, but it's no longer part of the layout. Can you talk to both of those points, the walkability and the retail?
Sure. To speak to the retail first.
Sure.
It's not uncommon, especially when you're in an area that has been viewed as potentially mixed use, to include some other components in the traffic study. So a small amount of retail was included in the study, but ultimately they chose not to utilize that in the proposed program.
Is that because the retail would generate different types of trips than residential?
That's correct. So the traffic analysis has to be done before the rezoning is submitted.
Okay.
And so often you look to get the results of that analysis, and then you pick which parts of it you'd like to move forward with. So sometimes there are extra components that get modeled in the study, but then aren't proposed as part of the project. You can't propose something you didn't model.
Okay, gotcha.
So as far as walkability, they are proposing to keep the Alston design standards, which do relate to the layout of the streets, the landscaping, spatial relationships between streets, sidewalks, buildings. And so they are proposing to keep those aspects of the Alston plan. And we would anticipate that as part of development plan review that we would have very good pedestrian network along Cane Closer Road, along Petty Farm, and through the site.
That's great. Thank you.
So,
That is consistent with the Alston plan.
I have a question for staff. I'm just trying to get my head wrapped around this a little bit, so bear with me. When we look at the Petty Farm, I'm trying to look at Petty Farm, you had the NG and the NC. And then I'm looking at the development that was approved in 2014, referred to as Meritage.
Mm-hmm.
As I look at what's in the report, it almost looks like with the approval of the Meritage, I mean, the concept plan of NGNC almost gets modified, which would be the nicest way. I mean, it really changed it. I mean, it's so that I look at the Meritage, I look at what's going on in that residential to the north of all this, and it makes me realize that the lines that were there, as you're laying out the neighborhood general, the neighborhood center design zones, that the general has really encroached on to what you have designated as the NC. So that piece that was meant to be a destination area is really being absorbed as much more residential. And maybe back to, you know, the previous case where we see, well, this is what the market's dictating, that it's been sitting there for 15 plus years and it is what it is and nobody else, you know. But is that, am I looking at that right? That basically, even though we have a concept plan, the reality is the neighborhood general is really is taken over, and basically the neighborhood center design zone has gotten smaller as a result.
That is correct. Maybe I'll show you a graphic, not to get too far into the Alston plan, because as you said, that was back in 2014 when it was last amended, and the original plan's from 2006. And so what's being proposed is a destination center off of the 2017 Imagine Cary Community Plan. But the arrangement of these use zones did change, and the Brickyard proposed to introduce the NG, which was more single-family detached townhouse-like in nature, and they proposed that further away from 55 because they felt that those uses were a better fit as you got off of the main road and moved back closer to the railroad. And so that's when you see the beginning of the NG area, which was something that wasn't there before. And then this site is some of that area, some of the NG area and some of the NC area. So it straddles the two.
So we look at that, it's that area to the south of the NG that's really kind of where the number 15 is. It's basically the applicant site, if I'm looking at that correct. And so it's kind of in that, okay, in that buffer zone. Okay.
Yeah, it's the site is kind of half here and it's half here. You know, as I mentioned, that on balance, you know, if the rest of this develops in a non-residential manner around this site, then incrementally you have found your way towards mixed use. And so if this rezoning moves forward, then the next most important decision for this area becomes what happens next, and does that deliver the mixed use, you know, nature that's expected in a destination center and was originally envisioned, albeit in a slightly different form and fashion. These design zones and transportation analysis zones are very complicated things, and the destination center is a much simpler, more streamlined concept to sort of capture and envision and evaluate from. But there is still the broader, bigger picture of mixed use, and the remainder of the Petty Farm neighborhood, particularly the portions closest to 55 south of Mahal, do still leave the door open for non-residential use and the achievement of a mixed-use area.
Okay, thank you.
Any additional questions?
I have one more question. What's the estimated square footage of the apartments for the 1-bedroom and the 2-bedroom?
In terms of the interior?
Yes.
Yeah.
Do you have that?
So the average square footage is about 900 square feet.
Okay.
If I don't have any other questions, I'll look for a motion.
I have one other question.
Oh,
I'm sorry.
you beat it.
So would the applicant be responsible for that section of King Closure Road as part of their development in there?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
If that's all the questions we have, going once, going twice, I'll be looking for a motion.
I'll do it.
There's the motion, man.
I'll do it.
Probably should look this way.
I move that the board find case number 19 REZ10 is consistent with the comprehensive plan and all other applicable plans for the reasons set forth in staff report, presentation and discussion by the Planning and Zoning Board.
Do you have a second?
Second.
Lead us off.
Well, I think that, you know, we've had a lot of really good discussion about this, but, you know, when it probably comes down to it, it's another one of these difficult pieces of property, but I think they've done the best they can. It does, in my opinion, meet the live and work and shape parts of the plan, and I think, you know, that's important. Had some concerns about the buffer taken care of. My only issue, and I say this repeatedly, you know, again, this is another one of the parking situations, and like you said, I know the town's looking at that, but I do worry about if there is parking issues, how would it potentially overflow into the neighborhood? But I'm hoping that you'll get all that worked out so that that does not happen. And so overall, I think it's worth pushing forward.
Anything you want to add?
I was just looking, and it is a difficult site. You got a big stream buffer area, you got a railroad, and we're getting rid of a lumber yard. When you put it all in context, it's a pretty good plan.
Can I add something, Ryan? I really appreciate all the project commitments that are listed too, and the architectural character, and that it's going to be walkable. I think all of those things are great. I was a little confused, and Rob set me straight with the differences between the Alston plan and the Imagine Cary plan. So I agree. I think it's consistent, and I think it's going to set a good tone and hopefully influence future development, as Rob was mentioning in some of the question and answer.
Any other discussion?
Yeah, I think it's consistent. I think it's a really good fit. I am echoing the same concerns about the parking and just, I mean, it seems like the units are going to be on the smaller side, so that may lend itself to a different type of, tenant that's there that may only need the 1.4 parking spaces. So that makes a little bit more sense. It would be great to have more additional parking spaces on the property just because it is so self-contained. And if everything's full, there's really nowhere else for someone else to park that's, reasonable to get there. So that's the only concern. But otherwise, it's consistent and good use of the space.
Anyone else? I'll go ahead and chime in. I definitely agree with everything that's been echoed. The one thing that I am getting held up on, which it sounds like it's most of us, is this parking reduction. That's obviously not something that will make or break a case, but a 38% reduction just sounds like a lot. So one of the things I will encourage staff, and it sounds like there's something that might be in the works from a parking reduction ordinance change or more guidance around parking reductions. I think that will be helpful, especially with these multifamily requests that are coming in. It seems nearly all of them are asking for a reduction, so it's somewhat difficult to weigh, what is too much, where's the breaking point, and I think that this is a case that definitely highlights that, and just having a little more guidance and context around that, I think would be very helpful. But overall, I definitely think it's consistent. I think for Destination Center, it's definitely going to be adding some additional housing choice for residents, and definitely in support. So with that, we'll go ahead and call it to a vote. All those in favor of finding this consistent, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? This one carries 7-0.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
And I believe our next case is going to be Act 14, Land Development Ordinance Amendments. Again, Mr. Wilson.
Hello again.
Hello.
All right, so 2 rezonings done and 1 round of LDO amendments to go. So tonight I'm pleased to present an overview of Act 14, a round of proposed amendments to the Town Code and to the Land Development Ordinance as part of our ongoing implementation of the Cary Community Plan. Act 14 is comprised of 3 items. Item A consists of amendments recommended by the Streets Task Force for Townhouse Developments. Item B includes 3 amendments proposed to improve consistency with state law. And item C consists of 3 technical and minor amendments. Item A is a group of amendments to require all new townhouse streets and alleys to be publicly owned and maintained, and improve requirements for canopy trees and landscaping. It's important that we provide you with some background as to why this item is before you this evening. We start with the recognition that many townhouse neighborhoods built in Cary over the last 30 years contain private streets. Property owners and HOAs responsible for maintaining these streets have increasingly shared concerns and frustrations with council members and staff as streets have aged and required privately funded maintenance. Thus, the council asked staff to look at ways to encourage public streets. At this point, it would be natural to wonder why we didn't just reach for the easy button and require all townhouse streets to always be public. The answer is that the situation is not as simple as it seems on the surface. It involves a combination of both technical and adaptive elements. For starters, if we take our existing 50-foot wide local public street design standard and apply it everywhere, we're going to significantly reduce developer yield, reduce property taxes, drive up townhouse prices, and most likely will significantly reduce the number of townhouse communities being built in Cary. And this is in a community that's benefited from development through the years, so it should be no surprise that how we go about doing this would be of great interest to the development community and their bottom line. So recognizing the complex and multidisciplinary nature of the situation, staff formed a task force, including 24 staff members from 10 different departments. This allowed us to have the resources to take a comprehensive and holistic look at the situation in a truly one Cary kind of way. The task force started by going out in the field and taking a look at both existing and new townhouse neighborhoods in Cary. We frequently looked down streets in our townhouse neighborhoods and could not help but notice the sheer number of driveways and sewer cleanouts. Those are the little white PVC things you see up and down the street. We couldn't help but notice how many there were and in what close proximity they were to each other. And as the driveways get closer together, it can be challenging to get the proper driveway apron in place and maintain a standard vertical curb. This is why approximately half of the developers choose to use a roll or valley type of curb, such as you see in this photo, which is not part of our current public street standards. The streets and curb and gutter are usually constructed prior to development occurring on the individual lots. The home and the driveway then come along later. We noticed that when you use standard curb, it's important to make sure that the transitions occur in the correct places. Fortunately, this got fixed before the homeowner moved in. As far as driveway lengths, 18 feet is the bare minimum to keep a car from hanging out onto the sidewalk, and that's what our ordinance requires. And that's enough on a good day. We also discovered that the placement of the sidewalk with relation to the street is very important. When the sidewalk is placed next to the curb, homeowners have a tendency to place garbage containers on the sidewalk, which causes accessibility issues. Imagine trying to walk down the sidewalk, or better yet, imagine trying to navigate it down if you're confined to a wheelchair or have to use a walker. Having an offset sidewalk with a grass utility strip between the curb and the sidewalk, like you see here on the right, has the benefit of giving the garbage containers a place to rest. But the close proximity of driveways can create very interesting consequences. Like, I'm glad I don't have to maintain this small triangular patch of grass in the hot summer months. The size of driveways and their close proximity to each other create challenges for the aesthetics of a neighborhood as well, especially when developers and contractors are not paying close attention to what's happening next to each other. Driveways aren't the only things competing for space in townhouse communities. Streetlights, landscaping, and utilities all fight for space in most townhouse communities. These constraints create conflicts for tree root systems, and there's often insufficient room for trees as they mature. At the same time, it makes a big difference in appearance when you have trees in your neighborhood versus when you don't. To put it in simple terms, our observations led us to recognize there are a lot of things competing for space within our current townhouse communities. We used GIS to take a look at our street inventory and discovered that 85% of our townhouse streets are private streets. For that matter, this has been the fastest growing category of streets in Cary over the last decade. 10 years ago, private townhouse streets made up 3.5% of all of our streets in Cary. Today, they make up over 6% of all of our streets in Cary. Over the last 10 years, approximately 20% of the streets built in Cary have been private townhouse streets. That means that on average, 1 out of every 5 miles of street built each year in Cary was a private townhouse street. If we do nothing and continue to allow developers to build private streets, based on our current growth rates and approximately 15% of Cary being undeveloped, we'll get another 18 miles of private townhouse streets at build-out, or a 50% increase over what we have today. This led the task force to agree that the first step to solving the problem was to stop adding to the problem. So with this mission in mind, the group focused its efforts on dealing with new development and how to create better townhouse communities. The task force brought the town's development review committee and rezoning staff up to speed on this issue, and they began sharing this council concern with applicants. The result, as you may have noticed, has been rezonings offered with conditions to use public streets, and we've even had some developers offer to utilize public streets on their development plans when they didn't have to. After getting our internal stakeholders engaged, the group began working with several external stakeholders. Early in the process, we met with 3 professional design engineers to learn why townhouse developers choose private streets. Their insights were extremely helpful. We then talked and met with several HOA property managers and an engineering firm that does a lot of capital reserve studies for townhouse communities in Cary. Their perspectives were very enlightening and led us to conclude that the current model is not a sustainable one for townhouse developments. As part of the task force's journey, we grew to understand that our townhouse streets are much more than the physical asphalt and concrete that runs through neighborhoods. In addition to being used by cars, bikes, and pedestrians, they are corridors that carry water and sewer lines. They include dry utilities, such as electricity, gas, cable, and phone. They capture and direct stormwater. They provide access for emergency services and refuse collection. They provide places for people to park. and their design influences landscaping and the overall aesthetic feel of the neighborhood. How to come up with a solution that would address all of these elements and be mutually agreeable to everyone was the challenge. It was a challenge that required staff to respect each other, break down barriers, and work collaboratively to develop consensus. Along the way, the task force reminded ourselves of what the Imagine Cary Community Plan tells us to do: be the model of a highly regarded and well-maintained community. Our community values are clearly focused on high-quality neighborhoods, preserving their value and attractiveness over time, offering a diversity of housing price points, and having attractive, well-designed multimodal streets. At this point, the task force's work and fresh approach to the issue led to the group being asked to present its work at the council's retreat last winter. Working off the momentum that we got from the retreat, staff has finished developing our recommendations and re-engaged with our external stakeholders to get their feedback. This group included members of the professional engineering and design community, HOA property managers, and we even added townhouse builders. Their feedback was positive, and we made adjustments based on what we heard. So we've achieved consensus, and we're before you tonight with our final recommendations. The task force's recommendations revolve around 3 key themes. First, making sure that all future townhouse developments are built with public streets and alleys. Second, providing additional parking and design flexibility. And third, improving aesthetics through better landscaping. It's important to note that fixing townhouse streets will involve changes to 3 documents: the Land Development Ordinance, or LDO, the Community Appearance Manual, or CAM, and the Town Standard Specifications and Details Manual. The council must approve changes to the LDO and the CAM, while staff may administratively update the Standard Specifications and Details Manual. To quickly walk through our 3 key themes at a high level, first, we need to make changes in all 3 of these documents to support public streets and alleys. Second, we need to make changes to support design flexibility. These changes include new street cross-sections specifically designed for townhouse developments. We need to update our block length and driveway spacing requirements, as well as our curb requirements for alleys. We need to update our local street geometry requirements, which will maintain safety while increasing design flexibility. We need to make changes to accommodate perpendicular parking. As desired by townhouse communities, the actual parking spaces will be just outside of the right-of-way, so HOAs can continue to regulate who parks in these spaces on their own. Finally, we recommend changes to support parallel parking and make sure that guest spaces are appropriately located with relation to the units they serve. Our final theme is improving landscaping. This will be accomplished by tweaking our setback requirements, limiting the number of units in a row, and increasing the spacing between buildings to provide better spaces for canopy trees. Finally, we also propose to add new townhouse-specific landscaping requirements to the Community Appearance Manual. As previously noted, these changes are accomplished by updating multiple documents. The council will need to approve changes to the LDO and the CAM to support public streets, improve guest parking, add design flexibility, and create townhouse-specific landscaping requirements. And if the council chooses to approve these amendments to the LDO and the CAM, the staff will administratively follow suit and update the town standard specifications and details manual to coordinate with these changes. Updates would include requiring all future townhouse streets and alleys to be public, adding street cross-sections and alley cross-sections, allowing perpendicular parking, and adding more design flexibility. In closing, there is some give and take here. The amendments proposed require more space between buildings for canopy trees. At the same time, the recommended new 40-foot wide public townhouse street right-of-way is 10 feet or 20% smaller than our currently available one-size-fits-all 50-foot local public street right-of-way. We do believe that on balance, the proposed amendments deliver a win-win scenario for everyone involved, and the community will achieve better outcomes, including public townhouse street maintenance and more attractive and sustainable townhouse neighborhoods. Item B includes 3 amendments that would improve consistency with state law. The first is language that we're required to adopt regarding political signs in town right-of-ways. Since we don't allow political signs in any town-maintained rights-of-ways, though, this language will not have any practical impact. Second, we currently have extra rezoning criteria which are not required by state law. This amendment would remove the extra criteria and only include the items required by state law, thus giving council more discretion when making decisions on rezonings. And finally, in the case of physical hardships with parcels of land, the third amendment would provide opportunities for variances in conditional use districts, planned development districts, and in preliminary development plans. Item C includes 3 minor and technical amendments regarding accessory building setbacks, the process for correction of zoning map errors, and board references. These items are discussed in detail in your staff report. At the public hearing on January 23rd, regarding item A, a representative from a national townhouse builder and a local design engineer both expressed support for the proposed changes. It was noted that a standardized approach for public townhouse streets would add a degree of certainty to the development planning and review process that would make it smoother and more predictable for everyone, and that many of the proposed standards match and/or improve upon design features already being utilized on private townhouse streets. Regarding items B and C, no citizens spoke regarding these proposed amendments. In conclusion, staff believes and recommends that the board find the proposed amendments to be consistent with the Imagine Cary Community Plan. This concludes staff's presentation. We're available if you have any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Wilson. It's a very informative presentation. I'll now open it up to board questions. Does anyone have any questions or?
I have one question, and I think I know what probably the answer is, but I have to ask it anyway. So in all the staff's working with the consultants, I am going to make the assumption, but I just want to ask, was the Americans with Disability Act taken into consideration so that all the design standards that came up with took that into consideration, that compliant with ADA?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
If no one else, I'll look for a motion.
I'll make a motion. Make sure I get the right spot here. I move that the board find LDO Amendment Act 14 is consistent with the comprehensive plan and all other applicable plans for the reasons set forth in the staff report, presentation, and discussion by the Planning and Zoning Board.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Any discussion?
No.
Discussion. 1978. I was on the town council. All we were able to accomplish was putting up signs that said town maintenance ends here on streets in townhome developments. It was a miserable failure. This is so much better, such an improvement. It's the way it should have been done in 1978. But we're there, and I think it'll be a major contribution, particularly with more and more townhouses being built. It'll make our community look and operate a lot better. Mm-hmm. So I couldn't be more enthusiastic in supporting this.
I agree to what he said.
I agree too. I'd like to compliment staff for engaging external stakeholders and engineers, and I mean, it's everybody that's affected by these changes. I think it's awesome, and it is going to make Cary look better, and that is something that we all can appreciate. So thank you for your presentation tonight. It was very good.
Well, thanks. It was a team effort.
I know, but I'm just saying, like, it's great. It's great.
If there's no other discussion, would all those in favor please say aye?
Aye.
Any opposed? Carries 7-0. Thank you, Mr. Wilson.
Thank you.
And we'll now be moving to our last item of the agenda this evening is a motion to adjourn.
I move we adjourn.
I'll second.
All those in favor please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? We're adjourned.
This has been a production of Cary TV. Visit the Town of Cary's website at townofcary.org.